For hundreds of thousands of years during the Ice Age, great ice sheets spread and receded over northern Europe. It was during this time that early man began to make flint tools, imperishable objects which enable us to trace his development from remote times. These water-worn stones were chipped into blunt points at least 500,000 years ago, at the start of the Paleolithic period. This lasted until the Mesolithic period began, about 10,000 BC. Then came the Neolithic period, and the Bronze and Iron Ages completed the time scale of prehistoric man. Paleolithic men were hunters who lived in open settlements along the banks of rivers. Their pebble tools eventually gave way to roughly shaped hand axes, flints roughly chipped along the edges, named Abvillion after the place where they were first discovered. 250,000 more years passed before finely proportioned axes took their place, some pointed like this. They're called Acheulean from another site in France. The last cold period of the Ice Age began, and men abandoned their outdoor encampments and took shelter under cliffs and in caves. The deposits they left there have been carefully excavated. From the most recent at the top to the earliest at the bottom, they cover thousands of years of occupation. The gorge of the river Vézère in central France is rich in prehistoric dwelling sites. Near Les Aisies, the limestone cliffs made ideal shelters for Paleolithic man. Here he built his huts and lit his fires in the cold winters. The deposits in this spacious shelter covered over 15,000 years. At Les Aisies, where houses are built into the rock shelters, excavations are still being carried on using modern techniques in the hope of adding to our incomplete knowledge of the Paleolithic period. Five miles away by the Vézère is Le Moustier, where a rock shelter above the village gave its name to the Mousterian period. Here habitation layers enable a time scale to be calculated, and in them were discovered the first remains of early man of the Mousterian period, Neanderthal man. He was an uncouth, ape-like man, but a successful hunter. For some unknown reason, he was completely replaced, towards the end of the Ice Age, by men of modern type, Cro-Magnon man, who had spread into Europe from the south. Hand axes were becoming smaller, made from flakes split from a core, roughly fashioned into shape along the cutting edges. Smaller and more varied tools were used in later Paleolithic times by successive races of these men of modern type. The Aurignacians were named after Aurignac in southern France, where a cave site yielded their tools and remains. They hunted herds of bison, horses, and reindeer which roamed the surrounding grasslands. The rock of Solutré in the Rhone Valley gave its name to the Solutrean culture. Under this cliff was found a 6-foot thick deposit of thousands of bones of horses and other animals driven up the sloping hill and over the cliff edge by Solutrean hunters. They made lance blades by a highly skilled technique of pressure flaking, the finest achievement of Paleolithic flint work. Then followed the Magdalenians, who developed a wide variety of tools. Long, thin flakes were used for knives, perhaps for making harpoons. Notched tools were used for shaping wooden shafts. They made scrapers for cleaning skins, boring tools for making holes, and pointed tools for engraving. wonderfully carved and engraved bones and antlers depict the animals the Magdalenians hunted. Necklaces made from bear's teeth and skulls of the cave bear itself show that man was not the only inhabitant of the caves. In almost inaccessible galleries, over 12,000 years ago, he drew, painted and engraved the animals he knew so well: bisons and bulls, horses and cows, reindeer and stags. Lances were incised on the animals to give added success in the chase. Strange symbols of sympathetic magic appear, and many of the hunters left imprints of their hands. This remarkable clay sculpture of 2 bison was discovered deep within a cave in the Pyrenees. The Mesolithic stage of development, the Middle Stone Age, commenced about 10,000 BC. It was a site in southern France, Mas d'Azil, that gave its name to the Mesolithic culture of the Azilians, a hunter-fisher people who lived in this cave cut right through the hillside. Many Azilian flints have been found, intended for mounting into wooden handles, and strange painted pebbles which may be examples of the earliest form of counting or writing. South of the Pyrenees, along the east coast of Spain, cave art continued, but it was of a different kind, and the artist probably came from North Africa. In the Val Torta are shelters with scenes painted in red and black. This restoration of a hunting scene shows that bows and arrows were used as well as spears. Europe was now slowly becoming warmer, and hunters moved into the northern areas which were at last free from ice. In Denmark there are great mounds called kitchen middens. This is the top of one. They were formed by the gradual accumulation of refuse from countless meals of shellfish, which was the staple diet. Primitive pottery was found, built up with strips of clay and tools of the Mesolithic peoples, spear points, small arrowheads, and very many fish hooks. The fine flint found in Denmark was used in many ways, for large implements, or for small geometrically shaped pieces for mounting into hafts of wood or bone. The Neolithic period began with the coming of farmer settlers from southwest Asia. Later, another migration spread into Europe from the western Mediterranean. In the east, one of the earliest Neolithic centers was Jericho, already by 7000 BC a town of perhaps 2,000 inhabitants. Excavations have revealed houses defended by strong walls and a round tower, and it was from such centers that the Neolithic way of life spread into Europe. At Vincha on the Danube, near Belgrade, is a hill built up from the debris of settlement since earliest Neolithic times. By the riverbank, 5,000 years of prehistory are exposed, with pottery in stratified layers. The earliest pottery is similar in decoration to that found in Turkey and Greece, and has connections with the fingernail imprinted ware of Anatolia and the painted spirals of Thessaly. In Neolithic times, the art of making stone tools reached its highest level. Axes were ground and polished until they looked like metal. Reaping knives and sickles were needed for harvesting, and stone querns were used for grinding the grain. In the western Mediterranean, the earliest settlements of the Neolithic peoples were along the coasts of southeast Spain. This flat plateau at Los Millares was the site of a town later surrounded by stone walls with towers. A causeway and an aqueduct have been traced, and oval huts and tombs excavated. The farmer settlers gradually spread into France and northern Italy and reached the lakes of Switzerland. On the marshy shores of the lake of Neuchâtel, remains of their settlements have been well preserved. This is a reconstruction of their wooden huts. They would not have stood in the lake, but on the shores, surrounded by water only in times of flood. Wooden beams from lakeside huts remain. They were expertly shaped with flint axes and adzes mounted in handles of antler or wood. Neolithic peoples made rough pottery without the use of a wheel, and grew flax and made colourfully patterned linens. Tools improved: axes, hammers, and later these fine flint daggers were copied in Denmark from metal daggers made in the East. Then, in northeastern Europe, there appeared a warlike people who made beautifully shaped battle axes and who preferred cattle raiding to cattle rearing. And from Spain came a trading people called beaker folk from their distinctive pottery. The battle axe invaders came from the east. The beaker-using people spread from Spain. But earlier in the Neolithic period, in contrast to the actual movement of people, there began a spread of religious ideas connected with the use of massive blocks of stone or megaliths. Megalithic architecture spread from the eastern Mediterranean as far as Scandinavia. Neolithic figurines found in the islands of the eastern Mediterranean and in Eastern Europe symbolize the mother goddess of a fertility religion. Some are decorated with spiral forms, which probably had a religious meaning, and spiral decoration is common on pottery. The best example of megalithic architecture is at Mycenae in Greece, where there are imposing tombs with circular chambers approached by narrow passages and covered by large mounds of earth. In Malta, huge stones in the form of circular enclosures were erected on the site of Neolithic sanctuaries. They were temples of the mother goddess, and again we have the spiral design. On the island of Minorca are massive gallery graves of unworked stone and strange pillars supporting large slabs in the megalithic tradition. There are many megalithic tombs in Spain, some beehive-shaped with corbelled roofs once covered with earth, and with doorways closed with perforated slabs. Commanding a fine view near Barcelona is this early tomb with its earth covering removed. Brittany has many chambered tombs and standing stones. This huge tomb is 250 feet long. Near Karnak are remarkable parallel lines of standing stones. They date from the later Bronze Age and stretch away 2.5 miles across the Breton countryside, a line towards the midsummer sunrise. These are the uncovered stones of another passage grave. Here's a well-preserved one with its mound intact. Inside these tombs are many carvings, zigzag lines, figures of the goddess, a spoked wheel for the sun, and the ship symbol, perhaps made by men who travelled across the sea to Britain, where on Dartmoor are avenues similar to those in Brittany. There are over 1,000 megalithic tombs in Britain, such as those that stand near the River Severn. Or chambered tombs like this one in the chalk downlands of Wiltshire, a long barrow with an interior passage. Nearby is the best-known megalithic monument, the circular temple of Stonehenge. Built on a Neolithic sanctuary, it took its present form in the Bronze Age, a superb culmination of the westward spread of megalithic architecture. There are similar tombs in Ireland, such as the enormous passage grave of Newgrange, its stones carved with the familiar spiral. At Clava in Scotland are these round-chambered tombs with dry stone walling and vaulting like those in Spain. Still further north, on the islands of Orkney, are the standing stones of the Circle of Broga, surrounded by a mound and ditch, and the great passage grave of Mace Howe. Here in the Orkneys, the stone-built houses of a Neolithic village have been uncovered. Narrow covered passages lead from one hut to the next, and there are hearths and built-in furniture of stone. The megalithic movement reached its limits in Scandinavia. This single chamber of a destroyed round barrow overlooks the central trackway of Jutland, which with the onset of the Bronze Age became more and more used for trade. Near the trackway are barrows of the Bronze Age. In these have been found quantities of amber, a valuable raw material which could be bartered for copper and bronze from the Mediterranean. And although the trade routes of the Bronze Age are difficult to trace, the sources of amber are known, and the routes to the Mediterranean. We know, too, where gold and silver were mined, and especially tin and copper, to make bronze. The metal traders from the east brought new ideas, and we find carvings of their ships and of the sun wheel, and there's much evidence of sun worship, such as this golden sun chariot found in a Danish bog. Hoards of bronze, left by wandering metalsmiths, have been unearthed. These bronze workers became highly skilled. The first objects made from metal were probably tools, and the axe developed into the fine socketed type. This is a mould for casting an axe, a clay core inside forming the hollow centre. Fine pottery was now being made, such as these vessels for storing grain. This one from Denmark is beautifully decorated. Reconstructions of Bronze Age bowls show how colourful they must have been. Wooden utensils, such as this cup and a folding seat, have been discovered, and even clothes, long preserved in a Danish peat bog. They were made of wool. Iron began to replace bronze in Europe about 800 BC, and Hallstatt, near Salzburg in the Alps, has given its name to an early Iron Age culture. On the shores of a lake, the village of Hallstatt is famous for objects found in an ancient cemetery in a valley above the houses, which give evidence of the changeover from bronze to the use of iron. Very little of the ironwork remains. These iron swords of a later culture had sharp and tempered cutting edges. Iron spearheads replaced the old flint types. But bronze continued in use. Hallstatt metalwork shows craftsmanship of a high order. Geometrical designs are interspersed with curious duck-like figures. Religious models like this wheeled chariot with the goddess carried between 4 horsemen were discovered, together with well-shaped buckets and flagons with fine curvilinear decoration. They made bronze helmets and used wheeled chariots and carts. Pottery urns shaped after Iron Age huts have been found in Italy. These fine metal cauldrons came from the late Iron Age, from a culture named after a Swiss site, Latène. This is a Latène neck ring. Although there were skilled artists among these people, writing was unknown. This developed in the East, through the clay tablets of Mesopotamia and the hieroglyphs of Egypt, to early Greek and Latin. Recorded history in Europe began with the Roman conquest, and we come to the close of the prehistoric era. But the constant study of the available evidence has enabled us to trace back the development of man in Europe to the time when he made his first primitive tools, over 500,000 years ago.